NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
Eagle, you're looking great.
The government agency that took us to the moon, to the edge of the solar system, to the birthplace of stars. Some of the most marvelous feats of our century, all made possible through the hard work of federal employees and their colleagues in industry and academia.
You'll find a sample with
In the 1990s, though, NASA faces the same problems that confront most U.S. government agencies: how to adjust to changing missions and leaner budgets.
Freedom, this is Discovery.
One part of the answer for NASA or any organization lies in strategic planning, a way to focus the agency's mission, its operations, and its management. It could be one of the most challenging frontiers yet.
Open, there's no problems at all.
In 1961, President Kennedy set a clear goal for the young space agency.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The Apollo program was a triumph of technology and a stunning example of what can be accomplished through planning and teamwork. It still holds up today as a model of effective management.
They're setting up the flag now.
But by the early 1990s, NASA was an organization in search of itself. The Challenger accident, problems with the Hubble Space Telescope, and the loss of a key spacecraft on its way to explore Mars led to an erosion of public confidence in the agency.
For NASA. I see very little in the history that would justify this Congress for taking yet another chance on you.
NASA's mission was unfocused, and despite the abundance of outside advice, there was no consensus on where it should head next.
So we had to come back to speak to the American people with a single voice, to unite with the American people so they knew where we were going. Where were we going to be in 25 years? Why were we going there?
At the same time, a profound shift was taking place in the federal government. It was becoming clear to Congress, to the White House, and to taxpayers that business as usual wouldn't work anymore.
There's nothing compassionate about building ever larger, ineffective, centralized bureaucracies and then adding to the deficit to pay for them. All of us on both sides of the aisle, in all branches and levels of government, need to stop looking for new ways to spend the people's money and stop measuring success by dollars spent and bureaucracies build, and start measuring our actions by how well they empower people.
By 1992, NASA realized that all the rosy predictions for its budget were never going to happen.
And in 1993, I'll never forget it, the summer of 93, we won the space station by 1 vote in the House of Representatives out of 435. There was a very clear signal. The American people were saying, we want a space program, but we want to know that it's relevant. We want to know that it's being managed very frugally because these are very precious dollars. We want to know that it's going to touch their lives and their children's lives.
Recognizing this, the agency began asking itself a basic question. If we can't do everything, what should we be doing? It was the start of strategic planning. Every federal agency has its own history, its own culture, and its own way of doing business. But all should understand this fundamental truth about government in the 1990s. Resources are scarce and will become scarcer.
We must reinvent the way our government does its business. That means setting priorities and sticking to them. It means focusing on how to best accomplish our missions. And it means placing a new and unprecedented priority on customer service.
Under the 1993 Government Performance and Results Act, Each agency is called upon to identify its mission and long-term goals and objectives, and describe how they are to be achieved.
And the key to this is having the agency speak with one voice, having a strategic plan that every employee knows about, that clearly delineates the mission, the goals, and the roadmap for the future.
Creating a strategic plan comes down to asking several basic questions. What is our mission and why? What are our long-term goals and objectives? How should we involve our stakeholders, the people we work for and with, in determining these goals and objectives? How do we go about accomplishing them? And how would we define successful performance?
Atlantis, we see you've shown an outside view.
First, an organization needs to clearly understand its mission. What larger societal purpose does it serve? Most agencies can look to their original authorizing legislation for a mission statement. But is that mission still relevant today? The answers might come from inside or outside the organization. In NASA's case, it was some of both. The agency's original charter, the 1958 Aeronautics and Space Act, directed it to advance knowledge of space, the Earth, and aeronautics, develop new technology, and disseminate the information widely. Upon review, that mandate turned out to be as pertinent today as it was 2 generations ago.
Roger, it's all downhill from here.
NASA employees were then asked where they saw the agency heading and how it should contribute to society. Some 7,000 people, or roughly 1/3 of the workforce, came forward with ideas, which then went to a team of employees and managers. The result, a vision statement for NASA.
NASA is an investment in America's future. As explorers, pioneers, and innovators, we boldly expand frontiers in air and space to inspire and serve America, and to benefit the quality of life on Earth.
In the process of creating its strategic plan, NASA also looked outside itself. Working groups did a scan of the external environment, the major political, economic, and societal factors affecting NASA's operations. What would the world look like in the future? What would be the landscape in which NASA would operate?
Building heat pipes that
NASA Administrator Dan Golden also led a series of town meetings to hear from a wide range of key stakeholders, scientists, students, government contractors, industry, and the general public on what they thought the agency should be doing. Town meetings may not work for every government agency, but all need to do some kind of external reality check to make sure their plans and desires are in line with the expectations of stakeholders and customers.
Button at the bottom of the screen.
In the course of strategic planning, NASA also consulted with the White House and Congress to identify their goals and objectives for the agency and get feedback on whether its plan was headed in the right direction. Support from both is critical if a plan is ever to get off the ground.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ultimately, NASA identified 3 key missions.
Advance and communicate scientific knowledge and understanding. Explore, use, and enable development of space. And research, develop, and transfer aerospace technologies.
With these missions in place, the next step in strategic planning was to define more clearly the agency's near-term, mid-term, and long-term goals and objectives. In 1993, top-level NASA managers began a series of retreats to do just that. As in any organization, there was the potential for conflicts to develop, with each part of the agency pushing its own agenda.
That was one of the things I'm most pleased about, is the way our leadership stepped up to this responsibility, put their own parochial views aside, and started thinking as an agency. So when we refer to the big hat, that's what we mean. We are all thinking of what does it mean to the agency, not what does it mean to me.
Take that back to your folks.
The NASA senior managers also actively involved the agency employees, setting up staff-level working groups to help develop the plan.
NASA Strategic Management Working Group is actually a virtual organization.
It consists of about 20 mid to senior level managers from across the agency. Our job has been, and our job will continue to be, to support the senior leadership in establishing the strategic direction for the agency. We help them conduct the environmental analysis, we help them identify the strategic issues, and ultimately, we help them establish the goals, the objectives, and the strategies for NASA's future.
Together, these working groups and senior managers identified 4 strategic enterprises, similar to a company's lines of business. Mission to planet Earth, the agency's program to study the Earth from space. Aeronautics, human exploration and development of space, and space science. Each enterprise, for example aeronautics, was then asked to identify its own primary customers, their requirements, the specific goals it meant to accomplish, and how those related to the broader agency goals.
That's it from here.
All this hard work resulted in a clear statement of the agency's vision, mission, goals, and objectives. And to demonstrate their commitment, every one of NASA's senior managers signed off on the plan.
We know where we're going, and we know how we're going to try to get there. So as we have to deal with these budget cuts, we'll know what it is that we can take out and what we must retain in order to achieve our ultimate goals.
And in the votes in the Congress, the American people are saying, yep, we now understand where NASA's going. Yep, NASA has been very frugal with our taxpayer dollars. They've turned back over $35 billion into deficit reductions and still started even more programs. It's a paradox. And the key to it all has been the strategic plan. This is how we communicate with each other.
So I would say this is a strategic plan that has the right stuff. I like that phrase. It has a kind of an association with NASA. Put customers first, cut red tape, and empower employees.
Strategic planning helps an organization understand itself, its capabilities, and its structure, and that may lead an agency to realign its activities to match the plan. NASA, for example, saw that carrying out its new plan would require changes in the organization, some of them quite substantial. The agency's 10 field centers had been established more than 30 years earlier, when the budget for the space program was much larger, and the main goal, beating the Russians to the moon, was different. In some cases, the old structure no longer made sense. So NASA redefined the center's roles and responsibilities, bringing their activities more in line with the newly established goals for the agency and the strategic enterprises. Each became a center of excellence, with lead responsibility for one key area of work. Other agencies may need to go through a similar exercise to take stock of their functions, structure, and deployment of resources to see if they are suited to carrying out the plan. No one can pretend that these kinds of changes that strategic planning requires are always easy.
It takes time. You have to commit yourself to spending the time that's necessary to do it. And that's part of this team building and building the credibility and the trust among the group. And we found that off-sites were the best way to do this, and we found that 2 days was about the right length for an off-site. And the reason for that is, in 2 days you can cover enough information to develop positions on various issues, and then it's necessary for the representatives, the senior leadership, to go back to their constituencies, to their employees, to their customers, and to the people that they have to represent, and make sure that the issues are being properly addressed from their perspective.
A strategic plan isn't engraved in stone. An agency needs to keep refining its plan and asking how it can do better. It's also important to check regularly with customers and other key stakeholders to make sure the plan stays in step with the outside world.
So it doesn't become a historical document that goes out of date, but it's a living document. It lives, it breathes, and it changes.
NASA already has published a third version of its strategic plan. The process of revision can itself sharpen thinking and lead to further improvements. The next version of the NASA plan, for example, will address specific objectives in more detail. With each version of its plan, NASA has achieved a deeper and broader consensus, both inside and outside the organization. Most NASA employees already are familiar with the agency's mission and goals. Increasing numbers also have come to understand their own roles in achieving those goals.
We're beginning to align our budgets by enterprise. We're beginning to look at how the agency is supported by enterprise, and it's really turning us toward an outward focus, where we're beginning to look at what our external customers want from NASA and organizing those requirements by enterprise for us to be able to fulfill them.
I work in an organization that has a definite calling within that particular plan. One of the areas that we're most concerned about is communicating knowledge. We're in the business of trying to make sure folks understand what the mission of this agency is.
You have a much better sense of what the overall agency is doing, where it's heading, and what part you play in what the agency does.
Once an agency has defined success, an important next step will be to develop measures of progress toward meeting goals and objectives. This will let managers see more clearly what is working and what is not.
Well, it just takes just a little bit of force to torque it around.
Having such measures in place also helps ensure that the plan will be implemented instead of just collecting dust on the shelf. NASA has developed several different types of measures: spacecraft costs, development time for flight projects, and launch rates for its space science and Earth observation programs. Even more important is to develop measures of outcomes, how well an agency is serving its customers and the public. For NASA, these will include measures of how effectively the agency generates and communicates new knowledge, and how successful it is in producing new technology and helping it reach the commercial marketplace. Meeting the challenges involved in developing such measures, as well as every other aspect of strategic planning, produces tremendous dividends.
Our experience that we've gained through this activity has been invaluable to us, and I would encourage other agencies who are just starting to make their attempt to develop their own plan to not lose faith and to stick with it, because it's not an easy process. It takes time, and you have to commit to that, and it's hard to do with all the other competing priorities. So I would like to add words of encouragement to those who are attempting this process.
Strategic planning charts a course for the future. It provides a better understanding of agency capabilities. It leads to clearer, more realistic goals and objectives that are in sync with political and economic realities. It also gives an organization a powerful tool for telling its story to the outside world.
A strategic plan makes you aware and conscious that a government organization doesn't exist for its own benefit, for the benefit of its employees. It makes you very aware what every American corporation knows. The only reason they exist is for their customers and their shareholders. And the plan is the contract that binds a government agency with their stakeholders, the American public, who pays very precious tax dollars for value-added services.
As NASA heads to the stars with projects like Mission to Planet Earth, the space station, and the new X-33 spacecraft, I fully expect other federal agencies to follow by implementing their own near and long-term strategic plans.
Strategic planning, helping ensure that the work of an agency, any agency, remains fresh and vital, whether that work is exploring the stars or doing the people's business here on Earth.